Jade started at the company about a year after I did. He was in IT and got the cubicle next to mine. At first glance, he seemed like an ordinary, quiet guy who was soft-spoken and mostly kept to himself. But there was something off about him. The cubicle walls were paper-thin, so I heard more of his life than I wanted to. Specifically, I heard his wife. Lucy called him constantly, multiple times a day, always screaming. I could hear her voice through the phone, shrill and vicious, even when he held it away from his ear.
I don't know why I even married you.
I didn't mean to upset you, Lucy.
That's all you ever do. Exist and disappoint.
I'm sorry.
It was always like that, or even worse. The calls were getting so brutal that one day during lunch, I couldn't help asking him about it.
Oh, Lucy's fine. She's just going through a lot of stress at work and her mother's sick.
He smiled sadly, picking at his sandwich. That doesn't mean she can pick on you like this. I think you should talk it out, dude.
I tried. It's complicated. I love her too much to watch her walk away, Samuel.
I didn't push. It was none of my business. But the calls got worse. One afternoon, she called him a pathetic excuse for a man, loud enough that people 3 cubicles over could hear. Jade just sat there, with his shoulders hunched, whispering apologies into the phone. Suddenly, a week before Valentine's, he stopped showing up to work. Initially, we figured he was sick or something, but by day 4, HR was calling his emergency contacts. Finally, after nearly a week, he walked into the office, looking like a ghost of himself. I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was greasy and uncombed, with dark circles under his eyes like bruises. His clothes were wrinkled, and his shirt was buttoned wrong. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 days. I asked if he was okay when he sat down at his desk. He apologized for not calling in and told me his wife had left him.
We had a huge fight, and she said she was done, packed a bag, and left.
He said he couldn't function or eat or sleep, just kept thinking about her and everything he did wrong.
But today, I woke up and decided I needed to take care of myself. Made myself a proper meal. Felt good to cook again. Really therapeutic, actually. Taking something raw and making it into something beautiful and nourishing.
His eyes had this distant look.
Lucy always said I couldn't do anything right. I wish she could see this.
I told him that it was good and he needed to take care of himself. Lunchtime came, and Jade pulled out his lunchbox. It wasn't his usual Tupperware with sad leftovers, but a nice insulated bag. He opened it, and the smell hit me immediately. It was something rich and savory, with perfectly seasoned meat. Inside were 2 thick steaks, cooked to a perfect medium rare, pink in the middle, seared on the outside, with what looked like a red wine reduction sauce. That looks incredible, Jade.
Thank you. I spent a lot of time on it. Had to be respectful with the meat, you know?
He cut into one with a plastic knife, the meat tender and juicy.
Here, freshly grass-fed. Try some.
He cut a piece and held it out on his fork. I took it and ate the piece. It was incredible, tender and flavorful, seasoned perfectly with rosemary and garlic. It was easily the best steak I'd ever tasted. I asked what cut it was. Jade grinned ear to ear and said,
"It's a special kind I've been preparing for days now."
He took another bite, chewing slowly with his eyes closed. For the first time since I'd known him, Jade looked peaceful and even proud. I felt happy for him until the afternoon came and 3 police officers walked into our office. They went straight to Jade's cubicle and told him he needed to come with them. They cuffed him while everyone watched. As they passed my desk, he turned and looked directly at me.
"I'm sorry, Samuel, but I really didn't want to taste it alone. I hope you enjoyed it." Please savor the taste, because that's all that's left of her now.
My stomach dropped. 20 minutes later, 2 detectives arrived to interview everyone. They pulled me aside and asked what exactly I'd eaten for lunch. I told them steak, really good steak. The detectives said Jade's wife had been missing for 6 days, and they'd found remains in his apartment that morning. In his mixer, his refrigerator, and packaged into meal prep containers. He said the medical examiner believed Jade had been consuming the remains over the past several days, cooking and eating them to dispose of the body. I made it to the bathroom before I threw up, kept throwing up until there was nothing left. They tested what was left in Jade's lunchbox and confirmed it was human tissue. I'd eaten a piece of her thigh. That was 3 weeks ago. Jade confessed to everything, told police he'd strangled Lucy during an argument, panicked about disposing of the body, and decided the only way was to make her disappear completely. He'd spent 5 days butchering, cooking, and eating her. He's in jail now, awaiting trial. I'm in therapy twice a week. I can't eat meat anymore, or even smell it cooking without my stomach turning. I've lost 15 pounds and can't sleep. I keep tasting that bite of steak and seeing Jade's peaceful smile. The worst part was that I told him it was delicious, and sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I remember exactly how it tasted. I hate myself for not knowing, but most of all, I hate that some small, sick part of me understands why he looked so peaceful that day. He'd finally silenced her screaming, and he'd shared his victory meal with the only person in the office who'd been kind to him.
I'd been living alone in this house for just about 2 weeks. I settled in quickly, having moved for work and pretty much starting my new job right after the move. Everything seemed fine. It wasn't anything special, but it was a home nonetheless. The town I was in was the only area I could afford, and I didn't make a ton, so it wasn't the nicest. Of the people I did meet though, they all seemed like decent people also just trying to get by. Anyway, one night after getting home from work, I walked into the house and was hit by a very strong odor. I had no idea what it was or what it could have been, but it smelled rancid. I walked through the whole house and didn't find anything, and after a few hours, it seemed to go away, so I figured it was nothing. Kinda forgot about it, until the following day, when I got home from work again and smelled the same rancid odor. I did a thorough check of the entire house, top to bottom in every room, and while I didn't find anything that could have been the source of the awful smell, I did find something strange. The lock on my back door, which was a sliding glass door, was unlocked. The switch was flipped up. I knew I checked all the doors every night before going to bed, and I hadn't opened that door since I'd moved in, so I couldn't see how it was possible for it to be unlocked. I opened the door and stepped into my backyard. There wasn't all that much to see. The backyard of this house was fenced on the sides, but open in the back, where it was woods. I didn't know if there were houses back there, or if it was just a forest, but at night, all I could see were trees. I didn't get any answers. I went back in, shut the door, and made absolutely sure it was locked. I was stumped by that door being unlocked for the rest of the night. Couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew that I kept it locked, but I also knew that if that were true, and the door was unlocked, then someone else had to have done it, which I also wasn't willing to believe. Nothing was missing, and yeah, there was a strange smell, but that wasn't enough to prove to me that something was really wrong. As I sat on the couch and watched TV for the rest of the night, I told myself that now that I was aware of everything, if something else happened, I would know for sure that something was wrong and would call the police immediately. I know I'll get hate for not calling the police right away, but in the moment, I wasn't thinking this was a horror story about to happen. It was just an unlocked door that could have been a simple mistake on my part. Maybe I did go out to the backyard at some point and forgot about it. I really just didn't know. I went to bed several hours later. But I woke up in the middle of the night. I was groggy, and I didn't wake up suddenly. It was more like something gradually woke me up. And as I was gradually waking up, I thought I'd heard this loud scratching sound, like a machine buzzing, but I was still mostly unconscious while I'd heard it. And when I'd opened my eyes, the sound was gone. Right away, though, I noticed a different sound. This constant dripping, echoing through the house. Sounded like water dropping from the kitchen faucet, hitting the metal sink tub. It wasn't just a few drops either. It kept going. So I quickly realized I must have left the sink handle slightly open. Wasn't sure how I didn't realize that before bed, but I didn't really think too much about it. I was still partially asleep and not thinking straight. I dragged myself out of bed and walked down the stairs to the kitchen. There were no other sounds in the house, just the dripping water. As I got closer to the sink, though, I started to pick up on that rotten, rancid smell. It was strong enough to wake me up from my half-asleep state I was in. I walked up to the sink. The water was dripping from the faucet just like I'd thought. I pushed the handle in to stop it. However, something was in the sink. I couldn't even tell what it was because I hadn't turned the lights on, and it was completely torn up and disfigured. It smelled horrible, and it looked like someone had been trying to stuff it down the drain, but had stopped in the middle of doing it before getting it all the way down. That's when I moved my eyes to the back door. Even in the dark and a few feet away, I could see that the latch was flipped up and unlocked. It dawned on me that someone was inside my home, probably in the middle of doing something with the sink, and went to hide when they heard me get up. I almost completely disregarded trying to figure out what was going on with the sink, and put all my attention on the person that I knew was inside with me. My eyes darted through every opening of the house. I wanted to turn the lights on, but I didn't want the person to know I was looking for them, or get startled and almost force them to attack me. I retraced my steps, going back into the hallway and slowly getting back up the stairs. I swear it was dead silent in the whole house. I could hear my heart beating. I quietly crept up the wooden stairs, and getting to the upper hall. Almost the instant I got there, sudden, loud footsteps thumped through the bottom floor, from the room right next to the kitchen I was just in. I froze up in a panic, completely jump-scared by the sound, even though I was already sure someone else was in the house with me. The person's footsteps stopped right in the kitchen, and I heard them struggling with something, which I can assume was them forcing whatever the hell that was into the drain. And then, a few moments later, the incinerator, or garbage disposal, turned on. Then it went quiet again. I was still frozen, scared to make any noise. Through the silence, I could hear a man's deep, heavy breathing coming from the kitchen. Then his footsteps moved back to the other room. I heard the sound of a garbage bag getting picked up or sorted through, and then the footsteps went back to the kitchen where I heard the back door slide open. Then it shut, and it was silent again. I got to my bedroom and notified the police. Of course, whoever the guy was down there, he had left my home and likely run out to the woods behind my house. What they found inside, though, was extremely disturbing. In the sink, the man had been shoving what investigators seemed to think were animal carcasses down into the drain. Something large, like a deer, that had been cut up into chunks so he could force it into the pipes. Which means that smell from the last few days was him having broken into my home multiple times to continue disposing of this. The big question is why? What was he trying to get rid of so bad, and why at my house? Cops' theory is he thought my home was still vacant, but I don't really buy that. I'd been there for 2 weeks and had furniture and stuff in there. They have no idea why he was doing what he was doing, though. If it was a deer or whatever, then possibly it was to try and get me to leave the home by constantly filling it with that horrible smell, like maybe the person hated me for some reason. But to me, it seems like he was trying to cover something up, getting rid of whatever that was in a way that no one could track. Or maybe he was even trying to frame me for something. I don't have any proof of that, but it's just a wild guess. Even a few years later, and in a different home, that event scarred me enough to have me still waking up some nights, thinking I smell that same rancid odor.
I want to start by saying that I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up with 3 older brothers. I've worked graveyard shifts at gas stations. And I've always been the person in the friend group who laughs at jump scares in horror movies. I tell you this because what I'm about to describe shook me in a way that took months to work through. And I want you to understand that it's not because I'm dramatic. I was 19 when I started babysitting for a woman named Renee. She had 2 kids, a 9-year-old boy named Marcus and a 6-year-old girl named Lily. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, about 15 minutes from my apartment, in one of those subdivisions where every house looks almost identical and the streets are wide and empty after dark. Renee was a nurse working evening shifts at a hospital across town, so I'd arrive around 5 and stay until she got home, usually sometime between 11 and midnight. Marcus was a quiet, serious kid who liked building things with Legos and reading graphic novels. Lily was the opposite, loud, imaginative, constantly inventing games that somehow always ended with me chasing her around the house. I liked both of them. I'd been working for Renee for about 4 months and genuinely felt comfortable there. The night it happened was a Wednesday in late October. Not Halloween, not that it would matter. But I mention it because the nights had gotten longer and darker earlier, and the neighborhood always felt a little more isolated once the sun went down in autumn. I'd made the kids grilled cheese for dinner, helped Lily through a bath, and was getting her settled when Marcus said something I initially brushed off. There was a man looking in the backyard window earlier. I looked up from tucking Lily's blanket. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. That practiced 9-year-old shrug that means they're trying to seem unbothered. "When you were giving Lily her bath, I was in the living room and thought I saw someone standing on the back porch, looking through the glass." I asked if he was sure, and he said he wasn't. Said it was dark and it might have been his own reflection. I told him it probably was, locked the back sliding door, which I had assumed was already locked, and tried to move on. But I checked that door twice more before I put Marcus to bed at 9:30. By 10 o'clock, I was alone on the couch, television on low, and I was starting to feel that particular kind of quiet that settles into a house after kids fall asleep. The kind of quiet where you start noticing sounds you didn't notice before. The refrigerator humming, the occasional creak from upstairs, and then something else. It was subtle at first, a sound I couldn't immediately categorize. Not a creak, not the house settling, something more deliberate. Like the slow, careful weight of footsteps trying very hard not to be footsteps, coming from the direction of the kitchen. I muted the television. Nothing. Silence. I told myself it was the fridge. I unmuted the TV. It happened again 10 minutes later, and this time I was certain it wasn't the fridge. It had rhythm. It had intention. I sat completely still on the couch and stared at the darkened hallway leading to the kitchen, and I felt something shift in my chest. That animal awareness, the part of your brain that predates language, telling you something is wrong. I got up and turned on the hallway light. The kitchen was empty, but the stool at the kitchen island was pulled out. Not far, maybe 8 inches. I was almost certain it had been pushed in when I made dinner. I always push the stools back in. It was a compulsive habit of mine. Almost certain isn't the same as certain, though, so I talked myself down. I went back to the couch. Then I noticed the glass. There was a glass on the counter near the sink, a clear drinking glass with maybe 2 inches of water in it. I hadn't poured that glass. I had given the kids juice with dinner, and I had been drinking from a water bottle I brought with me. I stood there staring at it for what felt like a long time, and I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. I called Renee. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and I kept my voice low and even. I told her what Marcus had said, what I'd heard, the stool and the glass. There was a pause on her end that lasted too long. Then she said, "Is the back door locked right now?" I said yes. She said, "Check the garage." I asked her why, and she said her ex-husband, Marcus's father, not Lily's, the one she left 2 years ago and had a restraining order against, Had a garage door code she'd never gotten around to changing. She said she'd been getting hang-up calls from blocked numbers all week and hadn't thought much of it. She was speaking faster now. I was already moving toward the interior garage door, and she told me not to open it, to take the kids out through the front door and go to a neighbor's house and call 911. I didn't make it to the garage door, because as I turned toward the hallway, I heard the door to the garage click. Not open, just the latch releasing, as though someone on the other side had their hand on the knob and had just decided to stop. I dropped the phone and I moved. I don't fully remember getting up the stairs. I remember grabbing Marcus from his bed and being surprised by how awake he was, like some part of him was waiting. I got Lily up, got both of them out the front door, left it wide open behind us, and ran 3 houses down to a neighbor I recognized. We were inside a stranger's kitchen when we heard Renee's front door slam shut from down the street. The police came. Renee came 40 minutes later, still in her scrubs. And I remember her hugging the kids in the neighbor's driveway while 2 officers walked through her house with flashlights. They found the water glass. They found scuff marks near the garage that suggested someone had been standing in that narrow space between the car and the wall for some time. One of the officers told me, quietly, that whoever was in there had been in there for a while. I thought about all the sounds I dismissed, all the minutes I'd sat 10 feet from that garage door, watching television, not knowing. They never confirmed it was Renee's ex. No cameras, no prints that meant anything. He denied it. The restraining order was reviewed and strengthened, for whatever that's worth. What I keep coming back to, even now, is Marcus. He saw someone at that back window and told me, clearly, calmly. The way a 9-year-old has already learned to manage fear tells an adult something important. And I locked the door and changed the subject. He knew something was wrong before I did. He'd probably known something was wrong for much longer than that. I don't babysit anymore. I don't say that to be dramatic. I just don't think I'm suited for it. For that particular responsibility of being the last line of protection for someone else's children in a house that isn't mine, in a situation I don't fully understand. Some quiet houses aren't empty. That's the thing nobody tells you until you've already learned it.